Peace, everyone. Welcome to the Black Child Advocacy Network, our first installment. This is going to be a special session that we do on this channel that is really about weaponizing knowledge to propel the attacks of the system against the African family, not just in places like the United States, but globally. We're going to cover a lot of issues. Like, for example, one that I just seen is issues with international adoptions, issues with foster children is what we're going to do today, issues with homeschooling. We're going to really talk about giving information to our families, because if you do not know, the African family is always under assault. It's always under attack by this system because this African family is a central means of resistance. And that's something that some people will try to play down, but it's very true. The more that we become dismantled as a family unit, the more easily we are for the system to take over and for incursions to occur. So because of that, this session, we're going to be giving legal information, different policies, different things like that. The goal is to always have this out on Saturdays. Originally, the goal was for me to live stream this. I'm a little nervous to live stream since I've had some connection issues. So for now and for the foreseeable future, probably going to pre-record this session. Also want to invite you to join a Patreon group for this aspect of the channel. So we have a Patreon group. Let me actually pull it up. I should have had that ready. It's going to be for Black parents. And there's going to be multiple tiers of that. Let me just log in one moment. Essentially, the purpose is to give us a means of communication outside of the normal being outside of the court system, outside of us dealing with each other, outside of a space that's not neutral. And so I wanted to start a Patreon that would give Black families that benefit. Okay, so here we have the Black Child Advocacy Network, legal support for Black families fighting back, basic membership, that's $5 a month. You'll get exclusives as far as news that's happening. I'm constantly looking for news of things that are happening that affect the Black families. So you'll get exclusives for that. You'll get priority as far as any questions you have. So I'll be watching these live streams, looking for questions, and you will get those priorities. And also, you will get to be a part of a private community. Like I said, I will have a separate Discord group just for Black parents so that we can communicate amongst each other. And then intermediate, $10 a month. A lot of same things, but in addition, you get unlimited access to legal resources. So one thing that I've been doing is stockpiling different legal issues into a doc folder, so you will have access to that. And also for the advanced level, you get access to free legal consultation. You can get a free copy of Fostering False Identity, the book that I wrote. It will be a digital copy, just so you know, but you will get a free copy to that. So these are the different levels of the Patreon. So I'll have that option also available to us. But with that, I want to get into the story about baby Myla. So we're going to share screen. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about this. And this story really touched home for me because with both of my children, whenever I was in a hospital with them, with both of them, they both had jaundice. And I remember particularly with my last son, Elisha, that I felt the surveillance of the system, hard this time, because to me, it's like by now I already know jaundice is literally like you can treat the child in so many different ways. You don't have to be in a hospital setting. You don't have to be under hospital surveillance. There's so many natural ways to treat it. One obvious one that we know about, obviously, is simply just putting your child in the sun. So there's natural ways that you can treat jaundice, but for some reason, they will look at you very hard if you want to treat your child at home. So this one actually did register with me. But just in case you didn't hear about this story, baby Myla, Texas newborn, seized after parents used a midwife, but she's on her way home now. So let's just talk about this case. It said following weeks of public pressure, baby Myla will be returned to her parents, Rodney and Tamika Jackson, after Dallas area authorities took the newborn from them based on the pediatrician's complaint to Child Protective Services. and this is a very important aspect of the story and probably the center of what we're going to talk about inside of this live stream. We have to understand that as Black parents, whenever we are inside of hospital settings, that is probably the most volatile setting you could be with your child. And unfortunately, that's not the case as far as us understanding, like, these people are not your friends. A lot of us offer information to them thinking that they are on our side, they're treating our child, therefore let me give them, the full story of something that happened or tell them everything I can. These people, I want to emphasize, they're not your friend. In fact, they really are your adversary. Legally, they are mandated reporters. Mandated reporters. In fact, if you don't know what a mandated reporter, let's just go to a definition of what it is. But I'll tell you in layman's terms, mandated reporters mean if they suspect that child abuse could happen, they're required to report. And that puts them inside of a situation where instead of being there for the benefit of your child, many times they're trying to protect their own jobs. Many times they're trying to protect their own professional career. And because they're mandated reporters, they see you do something. They're like, well, it's better you to go than me. So as it says right here, mandated reporters are required to report the facts and circumstances that led them to suspect that a child has been abused or neglected. They do not have the burden of proving proof that abuse or neglect has occurred. So as I said, mandated reporters take you outside of the setting of, oh, this is just my pediatrician, to put you inside of a situation where I'm literally being treated by an agent of the state. That's how those laws completely transform the relationship between parents and medicine. So understand, whenever you're inside of a hospital setting, you're not inside of a neutral setting. You're not even inside of a setting that's supportive of you. You're literally inside of a setting where people are there watching your every move, especially us. They're always watching our every move to see whether they agree with our decisions. I mean, there could be something as simple as a preference as far as parenting. You might talk to your child one way and this person wants to talk to their child a different way. Because of that, they're automatically going to suspect you of being a child abuser. It could be something simple like that. It could be medicine. In fact, next week, I think we're going to deal with certain aspects of natural medicine, but a lot of people feel like natural medicine is child abuse, which is asinine. Before we had all the chemical medicines, we were using natural remedies. In fact, many natural remedies work 1,000 times better than a lot of these chemicals. So that doesn't matter to them. What matters is a philosophical difference, and that's going to motivate them to suspect you of being a child abuser. So let's read on a little bit. Public pressure, and this is another key issue. They had public pressure in supporting them as far as getting their child back. So public pressure in illuminating violations of our most fundamental rights works. That's Marsha Jones. She's an executive director of Dallas Reproductive Justice Center. We're going to talk about them a little bit too. She said, Myla is finally belongs, but this never should have happened in the first place. Systemic racism is the reason why Myla was separated from her family, period. That's obvious. While the Jacksons finally get moments of rest needed, rest and joy, we'll keep fighting against the criminalization of Black parents, children, and midwives, because no one should live through this nightmare. So scrolling down, if you didn't know the story, back in March, the Jacksons opted for a home birth with a licensed midwife. Myla developed jaundice, a common condition in newborns that shows in yellowing skin and whites of the eyes. When the parents took Myla to their pediatrician, the pair have 2 sons. The doctor recommended inpatient treatment at a hospital. The Jacksons say they would be doing the phototherapy treatment at home under the guidance of their midwife, Cheryl. According to the letter Bott wrote to CPS, Bott said that he was concerned that the parents had the wrong lights. He ultimately reported them. After trying 10 attempts to appeal to the family through phone calls, text messages, and leaving voice messages, and they did not pick up the phone. In his letter, he cites the Jacksons' apparent wariness of medical industry complex, which, to be clear, is well-founded. Black maternal mortality rates are disproportionately high in America, and hospitals are known to discount Black women's pain. The hospitals are known to discount Black people's pain. I have to emphasize that. I don't know why there's this constant need by certain entities to make it a woman thing. I promise you, Black women and men both are dealing with the medical system in a very harsh way. Ours manifests differently, and that's the thing that we should know. Our issues manifest differently. It doesn't mean that our issues are worse. So us, we are the bearers who oftentimes are taking children to doctor's appointments. We are the ones who have different types of medical issues that are particular to women, and that puts us in a different place. But don't think that it's a Black woman issue. That's one way that they try to truly divide us. They said the parents are very loving and care deeply about their baby. Their distrust for medical care and guidance to make a decision for the baby to refuse a simple treatment that can prevent. Now, let's pause right here before we get into the system, because I think this is an important thing for us to understand, that you were put inside of a situation where you were thinking about system being racist, the medical system being not that. They feel like you basically capitulate to them because they have a philosophical difference about that. Well, we're not talking about, obviously, you have the issues of Black mortality rates, but like I said earlier, it's not a Black woman thing. Black woman mortality rates, not a Black woman thing. We have the Tuskegee experiments. We have syphilis experiments. We have so many different issues. We have when they would castrate us. We have so many different types of issues that happen with doctors that for anyone to trust a doctor, personally, I'm really questioning your judgment. If you trust the pharmaceutical industry, big one, right? I'm questioning your judgment, but that's not what they want you to do. They want you to have an unhealthy trust of the system, because when you distrust the system, that is a threat to the systems. They want you to defer to their knowledge. They want you to defer to their education, defer to the institutions, the educational institutions have taught them. That's really what they want, is compliance. So this manifests in so many different ways. Unfortunately for this family, it occurred in a way that essentially they lost a lot of time with their newborn child. They're going to make this seem like, oh, we're back to normal, everything's better. Listen, if a newborn child is taken from a parent for, let's say, a day, what you don't understand, particularly the mother, that has an effect on the newborn child. That has a grave effect. And studies have said that any type of separation, any type of removal is damaging to a child. So even though the system will make it seem like, oh, we put the child back with the mother, everything's better, understand that that's a real deception. It's going to take a true loving support to get that child to be inside of a environment where they can once again trust adults in their lives, where they can once again know that they have security. And so any type of incursion by the system is detrimental. But I want to give you some understanding of a few things. Number one, child removals, children being removed from the home. So as in this story, the child was removed and the child was returned home. The case is not over. That's one thing I want you to understand. The case is going to go on until the judge says that the case is dismissed. I haven't checked up. Let me see if anything's happened since I last researched this story, because maybe the case was dismissed by now. Let's see. But essentially, yes, the baby's back, but that's where we left off. Essentially, the case has not been dismissed as of yet. So what that means is that even though they have their parent back, they still have to talk to a caseworker. They still have to have incursions onto their family. They still have to show up in front of a judge until the judge dismisses the case. Now, if the judge dismisses the case at their next hearing, which I heard is a possibility, if the judge does that, that's essentially an admittance that your child should never have been in the system to begin with, or the case should never have been open to begin with. Because inside of the eyes of the system, a return home is not the last step. A return home basically is whenever you're ready to take your child, and then we're going to move on from there and do therapy. We're going to do more types of parenting classes, some type of thing basically to help you become the parent that you should have been. But if you instantly get your child home without any other services, that's the system admitting that they shouldn't have removed your child in the first place. So I want to give you the legal standard for adoption. Let me see if I have, sorry, one moment. A legal standard for child removals. And pulling that up. Sorry, everyone. I thought I had everything way more organized, but this is day one. I'll make sure to have everything more organized next time. I don't have my printout, but you know what? I'm just going to read from the document that I have. All right, so the legal standard for removal comes from a law called the Adoption and Safe Families Act. I talk about that law in detail inside of the book, Fostering False Identity, and I'll put the book link inside of the description. So essentially, you have something called reasonable efforts. That's whenever the caseworkers first get involved in your case, and they're supposed to basically do everything that they can to not remove your child before they say, okay, it's necessary to remove your child. So the Adoption and Safe Families Act says reasonable efforts refers to activities of the state, social services, agencies that aim to provide the assistance and services needed to preserve and reunify families. The federal Title 4E program requires states to make reasonable efforts to preserve and reunify families prior to the placement of a child in foster care, to prevent or eliminate the need for removing the child from the child's home, or to make it possible for a child to safely return to the child's home. So essentially, they're not supposed to remove your child without doing what they can to remediate the system. And that's really not what happened. So let's say that baby Myla was actually in danger. And should not be an instant, we disagree with you, let's take your child. It should be reasonable efforts to engage the parents, to find out what's going on with the parents, to find out how you can possibly treat the child in alternative ways, to get some type of medical confirmation. That didn't happen here. Basically, a pediatrician tried to reach out to the parents. The pediatrician was acting like the PD and said, you didn't do what I wanted you to do. You didn't answer my text. I'm going to report you to child services. Child services should not instantly go in and remove your child at that point. They're supposed to legally make reasonable efforts to try to not take your child. That doesn't happen many times. Many times the child workers will just basically say, oh, it's an emergency, I have to remove the child. And in that case, essentially, there's going to be a court hearing where they have to answer for whether or not they actually made reasonable efforts to not remove your child. So ASFA requires initial reasonable efforts to termination within 60 days of removal, or to make a finding that an emergency at the time of removal made services to prevent removal impractical. So again, what does that mean? That means that ASFA the caseworkers aren't supposed to just come in and remove your child. It's supposed to be either one, they tried reasonably, they did not try everything. They tried reasonable efforts to try to remediate the situation. Or two, there was an emergency that made them think that we have to remove this child, even though we don't necessarily have reason to. Now, something that's important to understand is that when it comes to those removals, there's some times where they don't have to make reasonable efforts. There's some times where they could literally come in and take your child just because. One instance is, let's say you lose one child to the child welfare system. It doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter what happened, it doesn't matter. If you had a termination of parental rights that was not voluntary, you didn't give your rights to the state, instead you basically lost your rights to your child, the state can instantly come in and just take your child. They don't have to make reasonable efforts. At that point, with your new child, that again, doesn't matter the circumstances, your rights were terminated previously, you're in a position where you have to fight to prove that you can take care of this child, even though you lost your rights to the other child. Very jacked up, very biased, very much in the favor of the system oppressing Black families, but that's an issue that occurs many times. Another one, for example, is if you were convicted of homicide. These are different instances where they don't have to make reasonable efforts. Essentially, they can come in, take your child, and there will be no type of legal ramifications for the system in that case. So another thing is that ASFA requires that there be a case plan made for your child when they're placed outside of your home. You want to read those case plans very carefully. They're going to tell you how you can get your child back, at least how the system says that you can put your child back. Many times, a lot of requirements that are ridiculous and asinine. They might make you take classes that are really not helpful, but you have to sit through them. They might have you do a number of services that's going to require you to miss work. Many things will be inside of those case plans. Also, ask for steps for services for child parents and foster parents to improve conditions in the parent's home, facilitate return of the child to their own safe home. So this is something that the parents had to deal with as far as having their child removed, and now the state has to prove that they made reasonable efforts. The fact that the child was put back means that the state did not, meaning that the state incurred on the family, something that we're very used to for our parents. Let's go back to the article, though. I want to talk about this AFIA Center, because one thing that I always feel like whenever there's these legal organizations that come to the rescue and they become the face of a story, many times these people are there for some oppressive means. So the AFIA Center, the Dallas organization, spearheaded effort to get Myla returned to her parents. They said that Myla is just one of many children adversely affected by the child welfare system. Myla isn't the first Black baby to be ripped away from her family. She won't be the last unless fundamental changes are made to the child welfare and criminal justice systems. Let's focus on this part right here. She won't be the last unless fundamental changes are made to the child welfare and criminal justice systems. We as the community have to be the one to decide what those are. And I'm sure this is probably a Black woman or something, but that does not necessarily make her of the community. When I say of the community, I mean of those most adversely affected, of those that are in the line of fire. And many times some of us are the system and we're removed from the community, being on the harsh aspect of dealing with things with the community. We have to decide what that means. I advocated in my book, probably the only solution within the United States is to completely separate from having a child welfare system, to completely have systems controlled by Black parents, where we are able to look after our own children, where we're able to give services to our own children and not basically rely on the system. Now, realistically, do I think that that's going to happen anytime soon? No. One thing I've started noticing is that while some people have been pushing for a defunding the child welfare system, even though we have defunded the police, we also have in the social services system people saying we need to defund the child welfare system. Some people have been pushing for that, but simultaneously, while you have those conversations happening, I'm noticing a turn as far as the news and reporting a lot of stories. This is not to make light of abuse stories. All are very serious. The problem with those stories is whenever they become the narrative that Black families are abusers. In fact, I found one story, we can actually read through if I can find it, that essentially, I'm going to share my screen right now, essentially made that very case that we are the abusers, basically, that we are abusing our children more than others. So let me show you this news story. Okay. So again, this is a news site called the Black Media Authority. This was actually written by the Defender Network, which is looks like probably for public defenders. Let's scroll down some. Houston mother beats her 4-month-old daughter because the boy's father no longer wants a relationship with her. A 7-year-old boy was found dead in a washing machine where his adoptive parents stuffed him after he was beaten. I want to emphasize his adoptive parents stuffed him inside of a washing machine. This is not his birth parents. suffocated, and possibly drowned, all because the boy stole the father's snacks. Horrible, very horrible. 2 teens who made a daring escape from a Cyprus home revealed unimaginable abuse and horror at the hands of their own mother and her younger boyfriend. The 16-year-olds were severely malnourished and had lacerations on their wrist, with being constrained with handcuffs. So you see what's happening. They give you these horrible images, and if you love children, assuming that these stories are true, you probably have emotions that are stirred up right now. So they talk about these tragic stories are endless, and child advocates say they're a prime example of the growing problem of child abuse in the Houston area. April is National Child Abuse Awareness Month. Community leaders say now more than ever it's necessary to discuss ways to work together to prevent child abuse and neglect, especially in the Black community. Now, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, Black children were 3 times more likely to die from abuse or neglect than white children. Let me show you right now. Here is a code word, or neglect. I talked about this in my book. If you look at the legal definition of neglect, it's literally poverty. So this is very deceptive because essentially we know Black parents are significantly more likely to be in poverty. Black children are significantly more likely to be in poverty. And yet they're saying abuse and neglect as though all neglect is abuse. That's not the case. Also, they said child abuse occurs within the Black community pretty much about at the same rate that Black people exist in the population, 13%. But it is the death that results from the child abuse where the numbers are skewed and Black children are far overrepresented. That's according to psychologist Dr. Norman Freed. He said 25% of all abuse cases in America are of Black children. And we know that 1 in 4 Black children by the age of 4 will be abused. But 1 in every 10 white children will be abused at the same age range. Now, these type of statistics, again, can be deceiving because number one, what do you count as abuse? Now, I'm not saying that we do not have probably more instances where children are harmed in our community because our community is more harmed. Our community is more harmed by the system globally. So whenever you're inside of a situation of high stress, whenever you yourself are being victimized by the system, it's very likely, more likely that you're also going to pass on that trauma to your children. That I know. However, are these statistics overstating the occurrences? Are they basically painting a false narrative that we just go out and abuse our children? Understand, to some people, just corporal punishment, period, is abuse. I certainly don't agree with that. I'm certainly not on that side, but I remember many times where any parent that just, when I was working in child welfare, any parent that just physically touched your child in any type of way, automatically the assumption is abuse, which is not correct. Now, according to Be a Resource, the number of children under Child Protective Services in Houston continues to grow. For example, 16,000 children are involved with CPS-related cases. That number has, of that number, more than 1,000 of them were removed from their homes in an emergency. Emergencies, like we said, does not necessarily mean abuse. Emergencies can be any time that they think the child is in danger. So it could be a situation like baby Myla, where it's the child has jaundice and the doctor wants them to be treated a different way. It could be instances where the child, just says something, mama hits me, and someone takes that in the worst way possible and that child is removed. It can be any time where they think that it's a danger to the child. Doesn't mean abuse necessarily occurred. It's that these children and victims suffer severe and life-altering consequences. As a result of their abuse, the abuse they suffer, they have lasting consequences and impacts them physically, psychologically, behaviorally, and cognitively as well. Scrolling down, they're talking about spare the rod. Children advocates have identified the abuse of children in Black communities as a byproduct of the normalization of abuse experienced by Black parents as a whole. Now, again, you're using words that can mean a lot. Is abuse really normalized in the Black community? In my opinion, it's not. Anytime that I see a child be physically handled in a way that is excessive, most Black parents have a disgust towards that. But just because there's a difference of opinion on corporal punishment, they're going to make it seem like it's completely normal to abuse your child in our communities. They said that many parents say, I was beat and I've turned out just fine. Spare the rod, spoil the child. And the excuses behind physical punishment become muddled because of the traditions in the Black community. Fried says, while the mindsets have changed, it's important to draw a distinction between child abuse and normal discipline. He said different types of cultural norms that go into parenting, whether it's Black versus white families or different religions or cultures, that's not included in the statistics for child abuse. He said what we talk about when we discuss child abuse are heinous crimes whereby a child's sense of safety is threatened and by a life-threatening event. That's not the definition of child abuse. But he's making it seem like anytime that we're talking about abuse, it's like this situation where a life-threatening event happens. No, anything that is beyond reasonable in the eyes of the state, whenever you're disciplining your child, can automatically be seen as abuse. And so, and any experience for a child that involves a sense of absence of safety, where they are hurt either emotionally or physically, that doesn't mean that certain cultures that allow spanking should be considered abusive. This is more a traumatic event that is placed somewhere in the brain of the child and their worldview is changed forever. Now, scrolling down, they say distinction between race and poverty. Racial disparities in reporting child abuse have been documented before, but prior studies have not controlled well for poverty, which is a risk factor for abuse. Some experts argue that disproportionate reporting of injured Black children as possible abuse victims reflects only that their families tend to have lower incomes, and not that medical professionals are subject to bias. This is their argument. Essentially, it's not us, it's them. Even when we control for income, in that case, via insurance types, African-American children are still significantly overrepresented as suspected victims of child abuse. In addition, they were reported with lower injury severity scores, meaning there was more suspicion for children with less severe injuries in one particular racial group. So what that means is that the hospitals are treating us differently, because even if you compare us to how they report white parents, for less significant injuries, they're going to report Black parents. So this is the narrative that they're really spinning as far as how we treat our children and how our children are at danger inside of our homes, and therefore they need state intervention. This goes towards the narrative that I was talking about, because at the same time that we're having these discussions, people are having discussions about the funding the child welfare system. At the same time, these really horrible cases are coming. Sorry, everyone, I have to get my partner because he was not having it. So we're gonna try to record. Some of you might remember I used to have to hold my older son all the time whenever it was time to record. So hopefully he's quiet as his brother used to be. All right, so I want to talk now about the AFIA Center, because that's one story that I wanted to cover as far as the role of these nonprofits inside of our community. Some of them started by Black people, but some of them also are funded by outsiders who we associate as not being for us. So let's go over to that right now. We have the AFIA Center. So this is a Black nonprofit. They said they're about Black women and girls. Mission: transforming the lives, health, and overall well-being of Black women and children by providing refuge, education, and resources. They said we act to ignite the communal violence of Black women, resulting in our full achievement of reproductive freedom. Now, this is the group that was advocating on behalf of the parents inside of the foster care case where their child was removed, where little Myla was removed. They emphasize reproductive justice, which essentially is abortion access, birth justice, HIV/AIDS education and programs, decriminalization of Black bodies. So they have this long list of things. The question is, do we want groups like this representing us in the media? We want groups like this acting as if they could be the voice of our community whenever we're dealing with situations? Here's one thing I just wanted to point out about this group that I think is important. So there's a website where you can find out important information about your groups that you support. Particularly, I have this fly that's like harassing me right now. Particularly, you can find out their funders. So it's called Influence Watch. So let's see who funds the AFIA Center. All right, so it says they're a left-leaning, pro-abortion nonprofit that operates in Dallas, Texas. They seek to lessen restrictions on abortion in Texas through advocacy and lawsuits. The AFIA Center supports minors' access to abortion without parental involvement. I don't know what I'm curious to know y'all's opinion on that, because it says it's crazy to me personally. Immediate depopulation of all Dallas jails, prisons, detention facilities, and teaches about reproductive justice, a framework and ideological viewpoint that holds abortion as central to Black female empowerment. Now, we could talk about that just right there, but I want to go down just a little bit more. So they have a history of combating different messages that essentially make Black people getting abortion, negative narratives about that. Important thing to look into. The AFIA Center is funded by Groundswell Fund. A Bolathon to raise money for AFIA Center was called. The National Network for Abortion Funds has funded them. And if you look and click who Grounds Funds is, they are a grant-making organization that gives grants for reproductive issues. So they have a number of issues that they provide funding for, a number of groups they provide funding for. Important, though, is that they themselves receive funding from, who do you think? The Tides Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, David and Lucille Packard Foundation, Compton Foundation, Overbrook Foundation, Terra Health Foundation. Now, the reason I wanted to point this out is that obviously, you know, it's great that these people are helped out by this group, but I just wanted to put out there the question, do you consider this a conflict of interest whenever you have these groups that come forth to advocate for our families, to speak for our families, and they're receiving funding from people like the Open Society Foundation, people like George Soros? Also asking you, do you think it's a conflict of interest to be a group that is fighting to keep children with their parents, and at the same time seeing a group that is also being funded by pro-abortion groups inside of our community? This is just a discussion. Love to know your thoughts on that. My personal view is that these things go hand in hand. Whenever you see a big push for our families to basically be remain sovereign, or for us to receive our children back from the child welfare, for us to not have any intervention by the child welfare, it's just interesting that simultaneously, like, the solution to the issue, which is the population of the Black community growing at such an exponential rate, despite the fact that the genocidal campaign against us has been going on for a long time. It seems like a backdoor way that liberals will advocate for population control does seem to be through these types of issues of abortion access. This is not a stance, or I don't go into the pro-life, pro-whatever stance. That's not my area. I don't care personally about what label you want to put this as. It's more so saying that we can see an agenda manifesting on both ends. So is it coincidental that the same people who are basically advocating that we should have no child welfare system are at the same time advocating that we should have more abortion access? That's up for you to discuss. It's up for you to think through. Also think through what benefit does a society like the Open Society Foundation or George Soros have from funding groups like this? What benefit do they identify from funding groups like this? This is another question for you, because if you don't know, George Soros is a very vindictive character, someone who I would put in the lights of a Bill Gates, and someone who funds things that have a reason that goes deeper than what he basically puts it out there to be. So I'm going to throw those questions at you. I'm going to let you evaluate them, and I think we'll touch more on this question about the agendas floating through different nonprofits inside of our community, and whether or not they're actually saying or doing what they're supposed to be doing, or whether they have their own agenda to push inside of our community. So that's all for this episode. I hope this information was helpful. Again, you could subscribe or join the Patreon group, and the link will be in the description. My book, Fostering False Identity, that link will be in the description. Next week, I think we're going to talk about possibly homeschooling, but we're going to see more about, whether or not any other issues come up. So, if all things go well, y'all willing, I will be back next week to talk more about different issues inside of our community as far as our families and what we're fighting against. With that, I will see you all in the next video.